Hey, comrades, friends, Romans, countrymen, I have very good news, actually. The reason I was doing this was to update people since we did the update on Sunday, which is when this originally happened. But for anybody who didn't know about the original situation, um, there were 28 GTAA videos that went mysteriously missing on Sunday. Still very unclear what happened there. It doesn't seem like YouTube intentionally took them down. Uh, I still think the most likely thing is that there was some kind of glitch. But in any case, thanks to the hard work of our YouTube producer and Twitter manager Kelly, and going back and forth with him a bunch of times to try to figure out what happened and if there's anything to be done about it, almost everything has been restored. So the only thing that has not been restored was the stream that we did on Sunday afternoon. That was the crossover stream with the guys at 99 zu Eins. My German accent is probably not very good, but it is a German show that interviewed me on Sunday afternoon, and we did this. We did it as a crossover live stream that was simultaneously broadcast to both channels. That was actually ended just before whatever happened on Sunday, and so everything else is back, right? All of the other live streams and live episodes are back, except that one. So because that is the only one that was not restored, and I know it was frustrating because a lot of people were like in the middle of watching it when it went down. What I thought I'd do after this quick update, and if anybody has any questions in chat, we can answer that real quick. But after this quick update, what I thought we could do is I'll just re-air the lost live stream from Sunday afternoon, and then I'll come back for a few minutes at the end. I'm actually right in the middle of my 80s movie training montage, Eye of the Tiger, preparations to debate Charlie Kirk this weekend. So I'll kind of be in and out while it's replayed, and if there's stuff going on in chat or whatever, I'll check in on that a few times while we replay that lost stream with 99 zu Eins from Sunday afternoon, and then I'll come back at the end just to update about whatever else and answer a few chat questions that might have come up over the course of it and whatnot. So that is the plan. So here is that stream, and well, I like A. Belton's comment, no, let it stay lost, let it become a legend. But as much as aesthetically I enjoy the idea of that, it'll probably be less frustrating for the people who watched like half an hour of it before it was taken down, or whatever happened on Sunday, if we replay it now. So we're going to do that, and then I'm going to be back live again at the end. So this is not too confusing, because I know people will be coming in, I'm sure, throughout it without any context for this. We're going to have this convenient little ticker on the bottom of the screen saying, just so no one is confused, this part isn't live, although the parts before and after are. It's a restream of the lost live stream with 99 zu Eins from Sunday afternoon. And with any luck, that will be clear for everybody. So I am going to absent myself and replay this stream that was lost from Sunday afternoon.
Hello.
Oh, whoops, I forgot to turn off my backlights. Please keep talking, Daniel. I'll be back.
Yeah, I'm just gonna
Yeah, today is a little chaotic. This is one of our monthly English episodes because we also have some viewers and Patreons from the US or other English-speaking countries or just English-speaking. So thanks for watching. This is 99 zu 1 with one very, very, very nice crossover. It's a crossover with the almighty Ben Burgess, the writer. He's a philosophy instructor, columnist for Jacobin Magazine, author of 2 books. Go read them. They're awesome. One of them is Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. And the other one, I really like that one, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. One of my favorite videos of Ben Burgess is the one where he kind of goes into the whole, like, how people are reacting to the Woody Allen situation and how that doesn't even make sense from a left-wing perspective. So check Ben Burgess out. If you don't know him already, I kind of assume that you already do. So, hi, Nadim.
Hello, Daniel. Do I say Daniel or do I say Daniel? Daniel. I think I say Daniel. We actually should also be streaming. Yeah. I say Daniel. I said maybe I call you Dan. Dan on the English ones. Dan. No. Anyway, I think we should also be streaming on Ben Burgess's podcast.
I think we just tried to set that up. So that's.
Let me just check real quick.
Hi, Miriam. She's already saying hello.
Oh yeah, we are streaming, but we're not streaming in the stream that he set up. Okay, interesting. But I hope some people will be watching us. Let me. Is there anybody in the chat? No, I don't think you're in the chat, right? Because you're probably in another chat that is not connected to ours now. Let me just check real quick whether you're watching. Yes. 8 people are watching. I am happy about that. And I'm going to keep that window open so I can see your chat messages too, and we can also answer them in case there's something interesting there. Yeah, the reason why we hijacked Ben, of course, we didn't hijack Ben's stream. He actually gave us all the power to hijack his stream. But the reason why we are here is because there was a slight misunderstanding on the time zones, because we are actually in Germany and he is somewhere in the US. And I wrote CET, which means Central European Time, but I guess he understood CST, which would be something in the US, something different. Yeah, so we basically told him that we would stall for like 5 minutes, and that's what we're doing now, 3 minutes in, so we have 2 minutes to go. What do you want to talk about, Daniel?
We just had a major election in Germany, and I think that is kind of interesting. I'm very happy to see that the right-wing party AfD fell by by about 7% in the early projections, which kind of is cool. Like, one of those very, very minor wins, but it's actually not a win because you still have neoliberal fucknuts in the Senate. Yeah, but still, like at least that.
I don't know. For me, it looks like just more of the same.
Rinse repeat, of course. We're still waiting for the projection about the referendum, the popular vote about the disowning about the Deutsche Wohnen Co. enteignen, which I definitely am keeping my fingers crossed for. I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, guys. Like all the people that are watching on Ben's channel, I can see your chat here. Yeah, so if you're interested in knowing more about this, check this out. It's called. I can write a banner here. Yes, I can. Deutsche Wohnen und Co. enteignen.
On Twitch, Lukey Worker.
That's what it looks like.
Twitter bombs dropping regarding today's election.
Yes. Yeah, but can you keep my banner? Yeah, okay, I would like to. Yeah. See, check that out. Google that. Maybe you find some English articles about that, because that's, in our opinion, it's like one of the most significant left movements in the last 10-15 years, at least in Germany. So could be interesting for you guys. All right.
What else
is there? I have to talk about Ben being late. Will there be an SPD Linke Green coalition? So Daniel and me, we just talked about this, that looking at the stats right now, so the SPD and the CDU are basically on par, right? More or less. SPD is a little bit ahead. So before the election, SPD and CDU both kind of ruled out a coalition between the two of them because, basically because we had that for a very long time, and they kind of wanted to, set some signs. But I think it actually is more likely now that we're just going to have the same thing running. So another große Koalition, which means a great coalition between the great popular parties, which is the SPD and the CDU, and maybe they put someone else on top, like the Greens or the FDP. But of course, right now, because of the quite even distribution of the votes right now, I just read this, we have the most possibilities, just mathematically, we have the most possibilities in any election for a coalition ever.
What I'm really, really loathing is if there's a great coalition, we still have the chance of getting Friedrich Merz, nicknamed Fritz the Cunt, rightfully so, as probably either labor minister or minister for economics, and that would be like he's like the bastard child of Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And no, please, God, dear Lord, I'm not even religious, but that one makes me pray. Dear Lord. No.
Okay, folks. The Burgess has entered the building, so I will let him into the room. Mr. Ben Burgess, welcome to your own stream.
Thanks, guys.
I have these funny soundboards, so let's go like, yay! So I just for you, Ben, I just checked your stream side, and we are streaming, but we're not streaming over the stream that you set up, but we're streaming over somewhere else. But it's on your channel. Okay. Should be fine. Yeah. So there was someone asking in the chat what this is about. So let's get to that. What are we going to talk about today? So basically, maybe some small introduction. We already gave an introduction to Ben, right, Daniel? You already talked a little bit about who Ben is.
And I think that his audience kind of knows him.
That's true, but maybe ours doesn't. But ours now knows him, and So look, guys, the point is that last year in the summer, as all of you are aware, Michael Brooks left us, and Michael Brooks was like also for me and for Daniel, and also for me and my wife. Actually, was like a very important person. We kind of listened to him a lot, and when he left, we were actually devastated. Was like the first experience of a real parasocial relationship that we've built, right? So I had gotten like 2 answers to some messages from him at some point, but we never had any real contact. But yeah, just having that huge gap in there, we started thinking of how to fill that. And of course, there are many people in the US that do that, but we were also talking about doing something like this in Germany, and that's when we decided to, in the spirit of Michael and in the spirit of people that work with Michael, like Ben, to start 99, which is our own channel that started now in January. Going a little bit in Michael's footsteps, but also trying to do our own thing, and of course also everything in German most of the time. But we have a couple of English episodes because we try to connect with the American shows also, which is what we're doing right now, reaching out to Ben, and we're really glad to have him with us. Thanks for coming, Ben.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and my apologies for being an idiot about the time zone. Like I actually, I actually do know that Germany is not in Chicago's time zone, but for some reason that whole conversation in my head, I just like never once questioned that.
Yeah, no. I actually, it was the first time, because I already had some crossovers with Varn and with This Is Revolution, and there we always spoke about Berlin time. But this was actually the first time that I used. This was the first time that I used the CET thing, because I just thought, oh yeah, that's also something, unambiguous. But apparently not.
Berlin time would have been much less ambiguous, because I'm so used to seeing C.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, right, Central. That's kind of weird. I guess it's 1 in
Right.
the morning for them, whatever, you know, that's what they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so why don't we start? Someone was asking in your chat what the chat is going to be about. So basically, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about your books, the 2 books that you've written for Zero Books, give them an argument, and Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. You're writing on a 3rd book right now, I think, on what's his name? You're writing on a 3rd book right now, right? Christopher Hitchens, there it is, right?
Yeah,
exactly. That's coming out sometime next year, right?
I think it should actually be out in December. That was the original idea anyway, because that's going to be about the 10-year anniversary of his death, and I think we're on track for that. I mean, normally Zero Books is really touchy about they really want like the 10-month gap between when it's turned in and when it comes out. For the sake of, I think they say, for the sake of like distribution things with bookstores, although also like, maybe not in Germany, but like in the US, there are like 3 bookstores left. I'm not sure how many people are actually buying books from there. But in this case, I think we did manage to convince them to do the accelerated schedule.
Right. No, I mean, we are getting Zero Books here in Germany, so we got them.
Excellent.
Yeah, excellent. And I also like the books a lot. For me, as I said, this is also a very special podcast because, looking back at your contributions at TMBS, that was always like you actually introduced me to this idea of reclaiming arguments and reclaiming logic as a tool for the left. Your debunking sessions at Michael's were always quite funny and at the same time enlightening. So this is a little bit what we're going to talk about today. And then on the second part, we basically come to canceling comedians and also how these are connected and maybe point towards, future work that you or anybody should be looking into. So let's start.
Fire away.
Did I now close the questions? I shouldn't close the questions. This is not good. All right. All right. So to the first book. Yeah, go ahead. You start.
Okay. So Give Them an Argument was published in 2018. So in the lead up to the second Bernie campaign and Canceling Comedians, I think last year, mostly being written in 2019, 2020. So both your books can be understood as kind of like interventions in the leftist discourse. Canceling Comedians even has that as a subtitle. So what is the common denominator in your motivation for writing these books? And in what way has your view on the US left evolved between those books?
Ben, you're muted for some reason. I'll unmute you. Or no, I can't. Now you're. Okay.
Sorry, I actually did that myself. So the background noise here wouldn't make it in. But yeah, I mean, Give Them an Argument was written in 2018. That summer, revised a little bit in the fall, came out in 2019. It was written in 2018. And as you say, Canceling Comedians was was started in the fall of 2019, and the last part of it, was written in early 2020. There's like an appendix that was written in like summer 2020, but I kind of decided to let the bulk of the book sort of stay as like a time capsule from late 2019, very early 2020. Which I've thought about many times actually, because if I had started the book in summer 2020, I think in some ways it would have been a very different book, because of so much had happened since then. But I think as far as like as far as the views about the left that are in the book, I think most of what changed is a matter of emphasis. There's certainly some individual views that I hadn't had yet, but also, sometimes, people who don't like the second book will say like, oh, what happened? Or, there's some big, shift. I was like, I don't know. I mean, did you read the first one? Because in that first book, written in 2018, there is a lot of stuff in there about how one of the reasons why it is a valuable thing for people on the left to think harder about how arguments work and how to make good arguments and all of that stuff is that it is toxic and unhealthy when the only tools that we have available to us for pushing back against our political enemies are either mockery or moral condemnation. Now, I'm not against either of those things. I mean, I don't, I was on the Michael Brooks show for more than a year every week, so obviously I don't have a problem with mockery. And there, are certainly things in the world that deserve to be morally condemned. But the point that I made in the book is that if the only tools at our disposal, the only tools we sort of use on a day-to-day basis for fighting back against the right wing and centrists are mockery and moral condemnation, then I gave a few reasons why that's a bad situation, and why those shouldn't be the only tools available to us. But one of those it's right there in the first book, that inevitably, when political disagreements arise on the left, as they have, approximately once every 5 minutes since the French Revolution, then if those are the only tools that we have any practice in using, those are the tools that we're going to turn against each other in those intra-left debates, and the result is going to be incredibly toxic and incredibly alienating to most of the people that we want to win over. So, I mean, that's there, right? And give them an argument, or in Michael's book Against the Web, which I was helping him out with quite a bit and reading over drafts and stuff as it was going on. Which was written. There was some very early material in late 2019, but largely 2020. That's hold on, no, my timeline is messed up. There was some very early material in 2018, largely written in 2000. There we go.
When was it released? I got it here too.
It was April
2020, right? Yeah.
2020. Yeah. But in that book, he basically, the sort of core argument in Canceling Comedians is in Against the Web, in the chapter where, when he's talking about Brett Weinstein and the ways that, progressives often try to push back against these people and end up giving them fuel. That there are many careers on the right that were largely built by attempts at lefty platforming, and this is something he talks about in there, and he talked about increasingly in the last part of his life, that which was in fact a lot of what inspired me to do Canceling Comedians, was knowing him and kind of absorbing a lot of the points that he made, because there's like a very mild version of the critique that's sort of blink if you miss it, granted, and give an argument. But it's one that in a much stronger form, he made all the time, really, like, since I first got to know him in 2018, he made all the time, certainly in private, and then increasingly, on the show too. Like he would always. There's a joke that he made many times, included I think once, on air, about how if the American left ever had to go up to the mountains like Castro's guerrillas, we'd really be in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody would say that that going up to the mountains was ableist, because there was no around. So it was this is the kind of comment that like he made like incessantly. And so I think probably I think there's a lot of his influence, of course, in Canceling Comedians, and there's also a lot of influence from people whose work I've been reading and thinking about in the last couple of years. not all of them, I'm sure, will endorse everything that's in the book, but like some of the particular arguments, certainly Adolf Reed, who looms large in that book, Matt Brunig, some of the stuff that Brunig has done about, identity and, politics. Although again, a lot of people on the left, and I shouldn't single out as if this is something only leftists do. A lot of people in 2020, 2021, really is the more accurate way to put this, will have strong emotional reactions to like the titles of things and a very cursory idea of what they're about. And certainly we're not immune from that on the left, but I also think, again, it's kind of funny that some people do perceive more discontinuity there, because literally the first time I was on I guess the second time. The first time I was on the main show of TMBS. I've been on like a Sunday thing for patrons once, but but the first time I was on the main show, first time I was in studio on TMBS, literally that first time we had a whole discussion about why the left needed to get away and point epistemology from like referring to people just because they're part of some oppressed group. And so it's, from my perspective, it certainly seems like, even if there might be individual issues on which, I've shifted, which, I hope that I would do. That'd be a really bad sign if I never did, if I just said, this is, here are my positions on everything, and I don't care what I'm not listening, to anything that anybody says that might be a smart critique of it. So I'm sure I have shifted on some individual issues, but I think in broad strokes, that kind of critique of the left, was there certainly by early 2019.
And I'm interested because ultimately we're also talking to a German audience now, so probably not specifically for Germany, but do you have an idea how this is a specific issue on the American left, or is this something like, in your estimation, because of course we have some opinions too, but in your estimation, is this something that you can find maybe across the world on the left?
Yeah, I think so. So I think that there are some elements or contours of it that take particular forms in the American left that they don't take elsewhere, or that you get to a greater extent in the U.S. than some other countries. But one of those arguments that looms so large in Canceling Comedians is the one that Mark Fisher made in 2013, when he wrote his essay Exiting the Vampire Castle, which, like I think Michael says in Against the Web, the depressing thing about that essay is that it always feels like it was written last week, and of course Fisher was writing about the British left, so there's some continuity.
Yes.
Definitely some similarity there, and also I think realistically, look, the United States is so culturally hegemonic in so much of the world in so many ways that it would be amazing if, some of these things just have to do with like big global shifts, neoliberalism and all that are going to infect everybody to one degree or another. So they're going to arise independently everywhere. But even to the extent that some of these are our smelly little homegrown pathologies, given that level of cultural hegemony, it would be amazing if they weren't exported to the rest of the world sooner or later.
Yeah. No, just to make a point there, we did our own segment on Mark Fisher's article, The Vampire Castle, Exiting the Vampire Castle. So, so we also have some reasons to talk about that. Yes. But we'll get to that in a minute. I think before we go into talking a little bit about the first book, since you started writing Canceling Comedians, I think you just said that you started before 2020. So we lived through like a high peak that, by the way, it infected also a lot of the left here in Germany of the Bernie campaign, of course, the peak and then the fall of the Bernie campaign, and then that followed by the election of Biden, the end of last year. And since then, only my personal observation of the American left, at least like the left media landscape in the US, is one of a lot of disarray, a lot of infighting, even, I would say, and struggling to find like a common vision or grounding that before was there, simply because it was all kind of grounded in Bernie. Would you agree with this notion, or how else would you judge the current situation of the US left?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Honestly, there was a point in very late 2019, very early 2020, where I have moments of thinking, look, it could very well be that by the time this book comes out, Bernie Sanders will have won the Democratic nomination, and may well become president, and that would just utterly transform the terrain on which all this happens. And not that I was under any illusions that the stuff I was writing about would go away if that happened, but I think it would have seemed much less relevant because
right.
If things were on an upswing, then and the ways that the left sabotages itself that I talk about in the book basically weren't as effective at self-sabotage, because so many good things were going on, then the book might seem just weirdly irrelevant. And, I didn't need to worry about that, to put it mildly. That's like, in everything that I talked about in the book has become like 100 times worse since I finished writing it. Because, since I finished writing it, I kind of finished it, in the last, during the last gasps of the Bernie campaign, I think, if I'm remembering the timeline right here, and I think over the summer of last year, because of the national wave of protests and riots following the murder of George Floyd, there was and I think that had a lot of that effect even on the left, but I also think that in a way it sort of hit the pause button on this post-Bernie disorientation, because everybody was kind of focused on that in a different way, even though, again, I think there's a lot of toxic things that went with that. I talk about a little bit of that in the appendix to the book. But then particularly, and then I think also, when the general election really got going, even though a lot of leftists were Bernie or bust, it was still something that I think transfixed everybody's attention. And since then, I think it's like it's sort of the equivalent of if something incredibly traumatic happens to you, and but then there are like 12 other like really big things that are going on, and but then like once the other 12 things stop, like you really start dealing with your grief, from the first thing. I think that after the general election wrapped up, that's when the force the vote happened, which was essentially
exactly right.
Which was almost unbelievable. I mean, I'd say looking back on it, but are plenty of people who are still obsessed with that. Now.
It's as feverish. It's like a fever dream. Also, to be honest, even me, I got swept up a little bit in this intensity of the infighting with force the vote. That was something.
Of your position, I mean, it was hard not to get a little bit swept up in the intensity of that. And the amazing thing about it, I mean, abstracting from, I obviously have a take on it because, of course, I do. But taking a step back from what the right take is, who's right or who's wrong about that debate, like the big thing about it, relevant to your question, is this is certainly the entire online and sort of media left just eating itself alive, just this orgy of fratricidal, like violent energy about like anger about what was at the end of the day a argument about a possible hypothetical parliamentary tactic that if it had happened realistically would have been in the news for a day, and then everybody would have forgotten about it. And the fact that that was enough to do that, I think, is really revealing, because as you say, really not just when Bernie was actually running for president, but even in between the two runs, I think that sort of arc of Bernie Sanders declares for president in 2015, at which point everybody thinks, he's just, including him, right? Everybody, including him, thinks that it's just going to be, Dennis Kucinich 2.0. That's for German viewers who don't know who that is. That's Dennis Kucinich is a kind of eccentric former congressman from Ohio. He's about 4 feet tall. I think he claimed to have seen a UFO once, and back in like 2004, he was and I think very early in 2008, he was the left-wing candidate, the candidate who would say sort of Bernie-ish policy things, and I think he won Hawaii randomly, but other than that, he would get 3% of the vote in every state.
Okay.
And that's kind of what people thought that Bernie Sanders was going to be, like this slightly more impressive version of Dennis Kucinich. And when he first declared, it's amazing if you go back and watch that video, that he takes out, he's clearly just going on his lunch break or something from the Senate, and he takes out a folded up piece of paper from his pocket with his speech on it, and he's addressing 10 or 15 reporters. That's it. That was his announcement speech. Starts out, I'm not going to have a long time to take questions when this is done. So it was presented as a sideshow to a sideshow, but then it became this amazing landscape-changing thing that he won 22 states. And he became one of the most popular politicians in the country. And, there was always this at least strong possibility that he would run again. He would have a really good chance the second time. And in between the two campaigns, there was the squad being elected to Congress, which sort of felt like a continuation of that. And DSA was going from being a glorified mailing list of a few hundred people to, at this point, an organization of, 100,000 people, which is, while it's still nothing compared to the overall U.S. population, it's by far the largest socialist organization that's existed in the United States since maybe the Communist Party in the 40s, but maybe bigger even than that, and so all of this sort of upswing, the center of which was Bernie running for president, and you kind of knew that he was going to do it again in 2020. And then him doing it in 2020, because it was by far the biggest thing that happened in left politics in the United States in a generation, that exerted a kind of gravitational pull on anyone who had the slightest instinct for trying to involve themselves in real world politics and not just go off and do a reading group somewhere. And so, of course, you always had a few marginal sectarians, who would denounce it, but pretty much everybody else was all in on that. And then when that goes away, and more than just it going away, there's a sense that all of this progress, where at least robustly social democratic ideas were mainstream in a way that they hadn't been before, and it felt like there was this faction of U.S. politics that was centered around that was a real thing, and all of that started to feel like it was going away maybe, and people started to panic, and there was nothing that sort of pulled everybody's energies into. So yeah, you ended up getting these bizarre things that there was 2 months of extremely intense debate about whether some Congress people who didn't end up doing it should do this one particular parliamentary maneuver, and lots of people are still extremely bitter about that.
Right. I mean, the debate is still ongoing in some circles. I mean, that's what I noticed, at least in chats and on Twitter, etc.
Oh, absolutely.
I remember that in one of our second episode in Germany, in one of our second episode, like our second or third episode, someone in the chat mentioned forced to vote and how it was stupid not to do it, and we didn't even talk about this stuff. It just came out of nowhere. It was like kind of a big thing for people here too, apparently. So would you say, I mean, if you look at this, maybe last question as an introduction, maybe a bit long introduction, but then we get to the books. Would you say that if you see, it's kind of like this Empire Strikes Back moment, right? Where you had like this the New Hope, and then suddenly the establishment is back, and it's I mean, maybe with a coating of more wokeness and maybe some some I don't know deep pretend social programs or social programs that are maybe even to some extent helping people, at least in the short term. But it really feels like, okay, the good old Democrats are back and they're on the steering wheel. So do you think that looking at the time today, are your books still relevant? Are they as relevant? Are they maybe even more relevant right now, or are there other problems that we should focus on?
Yeah, I would say that if you were going to think that they've been less relevant, the reason would be that they're both written very explicitly for a very specific, well-defined audience. And that audience would be people who were, young socialists who were part of the kind of post-Bernie revival of the American socialist left.
Bernie Bros.
Yeah, exactly. Bernie Bros and Bernie Bros.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you were going to raise the question about whether they were less relevant, it wouldn't be because of the content of the books. It would be because you worry that audience, wasn't going to be as stable or well-defined or permanent, a force in American politics, that it would be that it would start to disintegrate or at the very least morph in ways that it would be like less recognized, like here's who I'm talking to. That would be the pessimistic interpretation, and I'm certainly not going to lie and say that there's absolutely no evidence for that pessimistic interpretation. I mean, clearly is, right? See the last few minutes of conversation, but I also don't think that pessimistic interpretation is clearly right. I think that there's at least some reason not to be quite that cynical about the future. I mean, it still remains the case that there's still 100,000 people in DSA. There are still several people in Congress who call themselves socialists. There's still just to gently caress the hand that feeds me, Jacobin is still a much has a vastly bigger reach than any kind of socialist media had for as long as anybody could remember. Before that, gets like 1 million hits a month. It's so there are, and it is still the case that I think the sort of broad popularity of a lot of those social democratic policies, what in the tradition of like the original SPD would be the minimum program, the broad popularity of that, and even some polling evidence that lots of young people are vaguely curious about the maximum program, like all of that is still the case, right? So I think that even if things aren't simple, there isn't this like sort of unifying pole of attraction quite the same way there was before. When there is, it's possible that we're in kind of a holding action right now, maybe for like the next 10 years until there's like another opportunity on that scale, and maybe when it comes, it'll look different. But there is, I think, some reason to think that audience is still relatively intact. And given that assumption, I think that both books are quite relevant. I mean, the first book is how to is teaching people about argumentation and how to study arguments and see if they're good or bad. And any possible left political projects, would benefit from that. I mean, I don't see any way around that. And the second book is an attempt to, is a critique of the ways that the left undermines itself. And I certainly don't see any of that, unfortunately, going away. So I think that remains very relevant. I mean, again, as we've been talking about, some of that has actually gotten much worse, for a variety of reasons in the last year. And obviously, the ideal thing would be that if people who thought the things and were doing the things that are being criticized in the book, that if some of them read it and thought, good point, right? I'll stop now. That would be the best case scenario. And I'm not so cynical that I don't think any of that could happen, but I think it could to a certain extent. But I think even to the extent that it doesn't, I think it's still the case that you have it can still be very useful, because there are people who told me that they pretty much dropped out of DSA, for example, because they were so disenchanted with all the kinds of things that I'm talking about in the book. But then, like, they read the book or heard me talk about the book, and then they rejoined. Or they. I think there are lots of different reactions that, like, the kinds of things I'm talking about in the book, for the most part, are things that lots of people notice in lots of ways and have very bad personal reactions to. And those very bad personal reactions can take them to a variety of places. Probably the most common is just burning out and becoming alienated from the left entirely, because they think, well, this is the deal, right? Either you go with eternal struggle sessions about all of the ways that which you're subtly bigoted, and you spend all of you like the idea of spending all of your time surveilling each other and denouncing each other, or the left is not for you, and so you could just burn out, fade away. The even worse possibility is that you can drift to the right, or you can become some sort of toxic post-left weirdo who spends all of your time whose politics become entirely about denouncing the people who are being criticized in the book in a way that's totally divorced from any kind of positive vision of radical change. And those all seem like really unhealthy outcomes to me. So if at the very least can usefully send the signal that no, it's like the meme, the little girl, why not both? That you can be that you can stay on the left. You can these political goals don't become any less important because some of the people who are fighting for them are profoundly strange and unhelpful in how they approach politics. And once you see that, look, you don't have to like the denunciations and the no clapping rules, all of that stuff. You don't have to like any of that, right? You can roll your eyes at that, but also say it's really important that we end the wars and give everybody health care and give working people more rights and dignity and and all of that stuff. And to the extent that I can convince people that, then I think it's still a worthwhile book to write.
Mm-hmm. I would kind of like start going to the through the two books now, and I would start out with the first one, Logic for the Left, and you present some basics for logic and critical reasoning in the book, certain definitions and fallacies. And now I really want to kind of like how can I say, not roast, but
Sure.
Test you a little bit on this. Can you, in a few minutes, like give us the most important logical concepts, definitions to our audience to help them improve their ability to reason?
Sure. So I guess one very general thing that I'd say is that even more than the specific concepts. Like, in other words, this specific logical terminology or discussion of fallacies, or all of that, like on that nitty gritty level. The sort of big picture thing that I want to do with the book is about how people approach those concepts, how they use them. Because all too often I'll see either, some people, extremely annoying people who kind of love like showing off, their knowledge of this stuff and kind of using this as like a tool to show how they are and to kind of cow people into silence, or people who are overreact to the first group and kind of roll their eyes when they hear any of this stuff mentioned. And I think both of them are equally unhelpful because, like the second one is something I see a lot when people, like some online leftists, will use logic as a verb, like, oh, he tried to logic me into, agreeing with this or something. And I have no idea what that means. But it seems to be a way of saying, look, this is just this kind of like silly preoccupation. This, like a lot of times it seems to me that some people on the online and media left have internalized this conception of what's going on with logic, or like logical fallacies, or like yellow cards you give somebody during a debate. These are like the Marquise of Queensberry's rules for gentlemanly debate or something, and that's not at all the point, right? In fact, for these to be relevant, you don't even have to be in the context of a debate. It could just be you personally trying to figure out what you think is true and reasoning to try to figure out what you think is true. And what mistakes are, what fallacies are mistakes in reasoning. So in other words, they're things where something might seem like a good reason to believe it, but actually that's an illusion. It's not really. And I think that the differences between these come out really clearly when you think about a couple of the fallacies that you're most likely to hear about, arguing about politics on the internet, like ad hominem or appeal to authority. Those are two that if you've heard of any of these, you've heard of those. And these are the ones that I think people are most likely to have the reaction to, that like, oh, these are just kind of like this like pansy-ass, like, rules that you're supposed to follow to play fair or something, but who cares about that? It's like, no, these are mistakes in reasoning. These are cases where something might seem like a reason to think that something is true, but they're not actually a reason to think that something is true. And those are also tied into the fact that most people who use them in either of the groups that I just mentioned don't quite know what they mean. So ad hominem in particular is the sort of dumb online argument version of ad hominem, is saying something mean. That's not ad hominem, right? Being rude might be a bad thing for various reasons. It hurts people's feelings, whatever. But it is being rude is not a logical fallacy, right? You can being mean to someone, right, is not a mistake in reasoning. And one of the big tip-offs that people don't quite understand what's going on here is that they'll say that something is a fallacy even when you haven't made an argument, right? Just like, oh, you're an asshole. Oh, that's the ad hominem fallacy. No, I didn't even argue. I just said you were an asshole. That's you have to actually be making an argument. A fallacy is a particular type of bad argument. You can't be making a bad argument if you're not making an argument, right? If you're just assuming something, that's not it. That can't be a fallacy. So what actual ad hominem is when you're taking an irrelevant negative premise about the person who's saying something, and you're inappropriately treating it as a reason to think that what they're saying is wrong. But the key word is irrelevant. If somebody if somebody says that they saw something and they've been caught lying about this 20 times in the past, that's not irrelevant. That's extremely relevant to whether you should believe what they're saying is true, because it undermines the evidence. But on the other hand, if Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, sometimes use casually racist language that was common at the time in their letters, and you're using this as a reason to think that the labor theory of value or materialist history is wrong, this is this theory of these, from these racist white European dudes, I don't believe that. Yeah, that's ad hominem.
Old white guys, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're treating an irrelevant negative fact about the speaker as a reason to think that what they're saying is wrong, or appeal to authority. It's the same thing.
We had such a fun instance of this ourselves, because I wrote a description text about the Middle East, and then somebody was like, you used the wrong phrasing, you asshole. And I was like, then Nadim was like, hey, come on, we just used like a common language that people are.
We call it the Middle East conflict, right?
Yeah.
So in Germany we say no, Ost conflict, Middle East conflict means Israel Palestine, right? So we're doing a segment on Palestine. We're doing a segment on Palestine, and someone goes ballistic on us using that term. They are pro-Palestine, and she's like, how can you? And typical. And I think in the end they even attacked me for being mansplaining to her or something, and that we are white guys mansplaining. And then I was like, but I'm actually Palestinian, and then that suddenly that solved the situation. Everything was calm after that. So that works also,
He did that. What's interesting, because I was actually thinking about this. I was wondering if this would come up in any way, because 90% of my interactions with German leftists, it's always very bizarre to me that it seems like the hegemonic position on the German left about Palestine is like 100% different from the position of the left in literally every single country in the world except possibly Israel itself. Has on that subject, that people just take for granted this sort of like left Zionist position, and sometimes not even particularly left Zionist. And
no, it's not left. Yeah, no,
yeah.
Left Zionists actually get denounced by they get attacked viciously. But we've made a lot of episodes on this kind of stuff, so we are pretty deep into this topic. So if you want to talk about that, then let's do that maybe in another episode. I think we can fill a couple of hours with that. Yeah. It's a very exciting topic, and I think the world outside should understand much better what's going on here, because it's really a loony bin. 100%.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking, that that maybe you could post game or something, you guys could illuminate about
let's
how that came about.
Sure. Sure, let's do that.
What I would also like to pick up is, because you're kind of giving. No, I'm not going to phrase it that way, because that's stupid. But no, interestingly enough, when I discuss or debate with people also in Germany, not only in the US or also in Germany, like especially the conservatives and right-wing people are prone to kind of like go into like, but I'm using logic, like this is just logic and not emotional. We know that bullshit talk, especially from really like fucknuts like Shapiro or Patterson.
Yeah.
Who Patterson didn't even read up on Marx before he debated Zizek on it. It was like, come on, you're not even trying, you asshole. And still they were like, oh, it's logical, it's not emotional. And you say in your book, as one of the main arguments, we should not allow that to happen, that the right kind of occupies those terms for themselves. So how is it possible that the right wing came to be so dominant in officially they're dominant, unofficially they're just talking bullshit like everybody else, but I feel they're claiming them to be there. And do you think we can even convince like bad faith actors like Shapiro and Patterson with logic and reasoning?
Sure. So I think there are actually two questions there, and we will start with the second one, because that's although I think they are related. So but the very last question, the answer is no. Right, like you can't, you're not going to convince Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson. I talk about this actually quite a bit in the book, like why that I don't really think that's a relevant question. Right, in other words, no, of course you're not going to convince Shapiro or Peterson. But I think that's a completely different question from should you debate Shapiro or Peterson if the opportunity comes up to do so. I mean, in a few days, I'm going to go debate Charlie Kirk in Arizona, and that's not because because I believe that like one of the possible outcomes is that at the end of the hour and a half that I spend with him, he's going to say, "Oosh, oh my God, I feel so ridiculous for having devoted my life to conservatism. I now see that I should be a democratic socialist. That won't happen. And I don't think that'll happen. That's not why I'm doing it. I think that the point of a debate is almost never, in most contexts, to convince the person you're actually literally speaking to, the person on the other podium, or the person, on the other side of the YouTube split screen if you're just doing it online. Because like even in like Facebook debates with your uncle or whatever, there aren't usually in the heat of the moment, even like ordinary people who don't get paid to talk about politics are too emotionally entangled in their argument, too much ego at stake to like actually admit that they're wrong, like in the moment. And when people do decide they're wrong about stuff like that, it's usually, certainly, even speaking personally, I'm not like criticizing people for this. I think this is just human nature. Most times in my life that I've heard good arguments for positions that I didn't want to take, my initial reaction was just irritation. I think that's pretty normal. But the way it works, and I'm here even talking about like ordinary people or even people like the audience who start out strongly identifying with one position. The way I think it more typically works isn't that you have some road to Damascus moment at the end of the debate or in the middle of the debate. It's that, you kind of dismiss it in the moment, but then, weeks later, months later, when there's a lot less, your ego isn't bound up in the same way. You find yourself thinking, plants a seed, you find yourself thinking back to it. It's like, oh, that was a really good point, wasn't it? And that's how people start to change. And of course, people do that all the time. I mean, the sort of, usual dumb joke I make about this, but I think it has some truth to it, is that it always amazes me when people on the left will tell me, oh, but like, what's the point? Nobody ever changes their mind. And like, sometimes when I actually know the person who's saying it, like, really, you're going to say this? Because know for a fact that you grew up in a right-wing evangelical Christian household and you became an atheist when you were 17 because you were watching Richard Dawkins videos, and then you were just a liberal until Bernie Sanders started running the first time in 2016, and then you joined BSA, and now you're like halfway to Maoism, and you're telling me that nobody changes their mind. So everybody changes their mind, right? Or at least most people do at some point or another in their lives. You have to be that doesn't mean that any particular person is going to be receptive to any particular argument at a particular time. It kind of has to hit you at that moment in the right way, and then it's a process. And certainly by the time you get to the point where you're actually like professionally, doing what we all do, that your politics are bound up with your personal and professional life, it's going to be extremely psychologically difficult. I'm not accusing anybody of being like a grifter here. I just mean like, just again, human nature. It's going to be extremely psychologically difficult for you to admit to yourself that like the fundamental premise that your life has been built around is wrong. That happens. There are people who undergo big dramatic political conversions even at that level, but it's going to be an extremely slow process. The point of arguing with your Shapiros, your Petersons, or your Charlie Kirks is to talk to people in the audience, like whatever segment of the audience, whatever percentage that is persuadable. Those are the people that you're talking.
I love
to.
that attitude. Yes. Yes.
People who are curious, but not really fully married to it, or who are maybe already starting to question some stuff, and maybe you can help them along in the process. So that's one thing. But then your question. Then I think the other two parts of the question you asked about how is it the right so successfully kind of rhetorically captured this territory of like, we're the ones who care about logic and facts and evidence, and the other one is about the relationship between logic and emotion. I think the answers are very closely related, because I think one of the reasons that the right was able to do that is that there is a widespread cultural perception, which they didn't create, right? I mean, it was around before, but they were certainly able to exploit. I mean, this is, if you watch the original Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy as Spock is always saying, it's like, oh, I don't care about emotions. Vulcans only care about logic. So like already right there, right? There's the assumption that emotions and logic are counterposed to each other.
And Spock is pretty cool.
Yeah, right. There you go. Right. So you want to be like Spock.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you have, and there are, and one of the primary arguments of the book is that they're not counterposed to each other. That's just a confused idea. But if you think they are counterposed to each other, then insofar as a lot of left-wing arguments, especially given the decline of the workers' movement, which appealed in a more straightforward way to self-interest, a lot of left-wing arguments, even more so, not that they weren't even in the 30s, but even more so, are appeals to compassion. And so if you want to resist those appeals, say, no, I don't care about that, right? I don't, don't tell me that I'm supposed to care about, Palestine or, Haitian immigrants in Texas. Then this idea that it would be virtuous in some way to be unemotional is going to really appeal to right wingers. That's going to be very easy. That's going to be very easy rhetoric for them to latch onto, even though the second you start looking at their arguments, they're terrible. Like almost uniform. It's just held together with like little pieces of chewing gum and duct tape,
the Nazis were left wing because they have socialists in their name. You're like, it can't even fucking start, Yeah,
exactly. It's like the same reason the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is a democracy. Yeah, exactly. So it's all just nonsense like that because they don't really expect anybody to pay attention. They just want to project the rhetorical aura of caring about logic and hope that carries them through and people don't pay enough attention. And far too many leftists are willing to play along with that, right? Like I quote in the book, somebody I like overall, right? I like quite a bit, Elizabeth Bruenig, the columnist for various publications, and she's kind of a, eccentric Catholic leftist, but she's a, but she's, like I like her. I agree with her about many things, but it drove me crazy. She wrote this review of a posthumous book by Ayn Rand, and she's got this line, Liz Bruenig does in the review where she says, well, Rand was a master of a certain kind of logic, but what about the logic of compassion, the logic of this and that? And they're like, no, what about the kind of logic that's actually about reasoning? Like, don't feed that to Ayn Rand, right? Like Ayn Rand makes zero good arguments that actually make sense when you start to think about them.
I just have to say it.
Free markets, yeah.
I have to say it now because that's something that really, really, really always catches me like as funny. Ayn Rand plays no role whatsoever in the European philosophical discourse. It's like they don't even look with their asses at her. It's really interesting. So she's below the threshold of being taken seriously. And in the US, some of the right wingers are like, oh, she's a great philosopher. It's like the same with Jordan Peterson, like a public intellectual. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, where's the intellectual? He's public, yeah, I give you that. But where's the intellectual?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, he literally admitted in the debate with Slavoj that he had that he'd only just now reread the Communist Manifesto, which you can literally read in an afternoon for the first time in 40 years. And at the time he made that comment, he had spent years as one of the world's most prominent critics of whatever he thinks Marxism is. Well, I mean, if he hadn't read the Communist Manifesto any time in the last 40 years, I'm guessing he wasn't like pouring through Capital Volume 3. That as a standard of intellectualism, that's pretty bad. But the basic argument I make in the book about logic and emotion, this is why the picture on the front cover my friend Ryan Lake drew is David Hume hushing Ben Shapiro as Ben Shapiro starts to say that facts don't care about your feelings. And the point is just that it's when you say things like that, facts don't care about your feelings. I don't care about the emotions like this fuzzy-head leftist. I only care about facts and logic. Well, you can't, any kind of moral or political conclusion, any of the moral or political conclusions that someone like Ben Shapiro would endorse, abortion is wrong, The United States should have stayed in Afghanistan for another 100 years, whatever. Like if his political conclusions, you can't derive, like just logically, you actually cannot derive any moral and political conclusion from purely factual premises. That if facts are the only things going in, then facts are the only things that can come out. You can't get a should out of that. You can only get a should if you have shoulds going in. Facts can be very relevant to coming up with shoulds, because once you've got some values in the background, and then there are a bunch of facts that are irrelevant to what we should do given the original values, like, okay, we really want to help unemployed people. Is a jobs guarantee or universal basic income going to be a better way to do that? And then maybe you can look at some evidence about how the two have played out in practice. But you need to have we care about helping unemployed people in the background, or else that factual information is going to be irrelevant. If you start out with anything that is alive and biologically human has a right to life, then okay, the fetus is alive from the moment of conception. Then you can get to your should, abortion is wrong conclusion, but that doesn't come out of the fact, right? It comes out of some facts combined with some values. So you have to start out emotionally caring about some moral and political goals, or the facts are just irrelevant.
So I kind of like you maybe could even put it like this. So it's because also the left does this separation of emotion and logic a lot. So if they insist so much on the moral high ground, so they kind of leave the space for the right wing to then attach and co-opt the logical high ground. Both of it is bullshit. But that's also how the performances work right now. Like we are so much superior to you in terms of morals, and the right wing says, yeah, screw your morals. We are so logical. I would also like kind of ask, how are we going to go along, or how are we going to confront these people? Because we kind of agreed, and I do so fully, that there is no way of convincing a Pedersen or Shapiro or Dave Rubin, or especially not that guy, about anything. But
maybe Dave Rubin, like, probably if you got him alone in a room, like in an hour, you could convince him of anything. But
yeah, if you write the proper check for it, I know. But yeah,
yeah, I think so. I think I agree. I mean, I just remember this Joe Rogan episode. Yeah, I think you can twist him pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think that there's not much going on in there. So like it might be that.
Did you just call me stupid?
If you speak very firmly, well, then maybe you back off of anything. But yeah, those other guys certainly can.
But I really like the idea of that we are having these debates for the people who are listening to the debate. I really appreciate that idea, and like even if you can only convince a fraction of the people listening to the debate, it's worth having a proper debate about this. If the other guys are not listening at all to logic, etc., and they're just really not caring, so they're just going for strawmans, they're brushing off your logic, etc. If we cannot approach them with logic, how can we confront them?
Yeah. So again, I make a distinction here, the one that you just alluded to, about who we're confronting and in what way, and I think that. No, you can't convince, Jordan Peterson. Probably if Jordan Peterson was going to have an epiphany, then all of the horrible stuff that's happened to him in the last year would be when that epiphany would have happened.
Never say never. Yeah.
And it clearly hasn't. That if you're going to have a road to Damascus moment, it'd probably be somewhere in between the Russian force coma and the Serbian rehab. But in any case, like, I'm extremely not optimistic about convincing Peterson, but that doesn't mean that I'm extremely non-optimistic about convincing everybody who listens to Peterson. Not that I think you can get them all, but I think there's a chunk of them that you can get, and it's important because that's a lot of people. Like sometimes there's this weird thing that'll happen in online left discourse where people say, "Oh, why are you still talking about Jordan Peterson, he's yesterday's news. And what they mean, it's been a while since any of the shows that they watch have mentioned them. But then you look at the Amazon charts of the 20 most purchased and read books of the last week. And every week, he's always there. Like all of these guys have audiences that like anybody who we see as a big deal, on the left, like all these guys have audiences that are like 200 times that size, which by the way, is maybe something to think about as a compassionate note, going back to the, force the vote stuff and all that, that like, you think about the left-wing media figure, whatever left-wing media figure you hate the most. And I'm not saying you don't have good reasons to hate him, but whatever left-wing figure you hate the most, just remember that anytime they wanted to announce a Dave Rubin style conversion, that would like quintuple their paycheck overnight and, quintuple their audience overnight. And they haven't done it. So, that's at least a few character points, right there, like I don't, I don't like Jimmy Dore very much, but I'll at least give him credit, for not having done that, but
no, good point. I never thought of that. Yeah, good point. Because I also don't like Jimmy Dore, but yeah, technically, you're right. Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't. It doesn't mean you have to start liking him, but like but that is a
right.
Even he, I think, has that in his favor. But
yeah.
I mean, the version of Jimmy Dore who announced, that he'd left the left would be, however nice his house is right now, he could like install one of those Scrooge McDuck pools of gold coins in it. But in any case, I think that that when you think about how you're going to reach whoever you can reach in the audience, you say, is it logic, is it emotional? I'd say it's both, because Liz Brunig, who I was criticizing earlier, one thing that she did say that I thought was really insightful is she said that a lot of times, like half the point of a debate is to get the other person to tell you, to like admit to what they really think. An example I watched recently that I think shows perfectly what I take her to have been talking about is a debate between Sam Cedar and somebody I've also debated, is Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute, and Sam is very, very good at this. He'll just sort of patiently, ask a bunch of kind of Socratic questions to draw out, a person's views until they like bite the bullet and say something just unspeakably awful. So in this case, at the end of the debate, they talked about the condo collapse in Miami, and which any German viewers who aren't familiar with this, there was this big catastrophic thing because the real estate, people in Miami were criminally negligent about it and were doing all kinds of really unsafe things, and a bunch of people died in this collapse. And because Yaron was saying over the course of it, no, you don't need, no need for any kind of regulatory state, interfering with the market. And so then, because, everybody should just like be responsible for themselves and their interactions in a free market. And so Sam brings up the Miami condo collapse, and Yaron says, well, it's their fault. It's those tenants, it was their responsibility to like do more research on this place before they moved in and see how often they did safety inspections. And obviously, if Yaron Brook is willing to bite that bullet, I mean, nothing you're ever going to say is going to convince him. But if you're in the audience, if you're watching this and you're a Yaron Brook fan, and anybody who likes Yaron Brook, they're way more likely to hear what Sam Cedar has to say if he's talking to Yaron Brook than if it's just Sam Cedar talking on the Majority Report, by himself. And anybody who kind of likes the sound of what Yaron Brook says, well, freedom, sure, that sounds good. I like freedom, I should be able to make my own decisions. And, if you're kind of thinking about, abortion and gay marriage and legal weed, then like all of the libertarian rhetoric sounds pretty good. But then say, oh, wait a second. really? Like we
Yeah.
didn't have regulation to make sure that condos aren't collapsing in Miami. That actually sounds really bad. And I think oftentimes the effect of this stuff is to logically draw out what the underlying value commitments are. And then I think a lot of people who might otherwise be tempted by the rhetoric in some of these figures can kind of see, fundamentally, I have value commitments that are just radically incompatible with what they're saying. Now this doesn't sound so good anymore.
Very nice. Ben, we wanted to go to a post game, but now that the time is a little bit, we're a little late already. I would say let's just keep going with the questions and keep this public. And then we go for maybe another half an hour and finish up. What do you think?
Sure. Yep.
Good for you? All right.
Should
Good.
we shout out, Mr. Christopher Cotton for donating €5?
I already, yes. Thanks a lot, Christopher. Christopher Cotton. I guess this is someone coming from Ben. Thanks a lot for your support, man. Right. Let's talk a little bit about canceling comedians while the world burns.
Yeah.
So first question, very easy. Why this title? How did you get to this title? And why do you think this case itself highlights some of the issues of the contemporary left?
Sure. I think probably there are like a few reasons why this title, and in terms of like how it occurred to me in the first place, I think probably because it was an example that Michael used in Against the Web, just kind of in passing, he was talking about ridiculous left-wing behavior, and he used the example of like getting mad at problematic comedy, and so that's probably how it got into my head in the first place. But then, as far as why I actually ran with it and used it, I think probably three reasons. The most substantive of the three is that I think that it's that what I'm criticizing, the primary thing I'm criticizing in the book, is a kind of deeply counterproductive moralism on the left. And when I say moralism, I know sometimes people who aren't used to talking that way might get that confused and think that I'm criticizing like caring about morality, and that's not it at all. Because after all, forgiveness is a moral impulse. Trying to focus on creating more just social institutions is a moral impulse. So when I talk about moralism, I'm talking not about morality in general, but about one very specific moral impulse, which is to hyper-focus on the moral evaluation of individuals. This is what I kind of think of as like making, thinking that it's like a really politically important question, whether, Joe Rogan is a good person or a bad person, whether Glenn Greenwald is a good person or a bad person, or, throw in one that I, because I just mentioned two people that I'm ambivalent about, various ways, I'll just to throw in one who I actually hate, right? Is Jimmy Dore a good person or a bad person, right? It's not,
Sometimes I wonder how like my favorite American comedian, George Carlin, would be perceived today. I mean, he literally said, "I love jokes about rape. Rape is hilarious." I mean, that would have been like the end of his career instantly.
Yeah. What did he say? There was one that was like people said jokes rape are funny, but then just imagine, what was it? It was like Daffy Duck raping the Porky Pig.
Porky Pig. That's why they call him Porky, don't they? And I mean, like, that's interesting because in the next moment he spun the joke around to actually make it about toxic masculinity, and it was a very clever, progressive joke. He just used like the tastelessness to kind of get an in, like get people like, what, attention, and then there we go.
Yeah, well, I mean, oftentimes humor is about defeating, subverting expectations. The very simple example that I use in the book that probably loses something in the retelling, because a lot of this is about timing and execution. But my friend David Feldman, who's worked as a stand-up comic and was a writer for The Daily Show at one point, Bill Maher back when Maher was less insufferable, the Triumph, the Insult Comic Dog, etc. But he also does this serious political show now, and there was once when we were talking about a mass shooting at a synagogue, and probably says something about how many hate crimes and mass shootings there have been in the last few years. I'm not 100% sure I remember which one he was talking about, but he started pivoting to this discussion of how what we really need to be talking about when we talk about this is gun control, and in setting up that point, look, I understand anti-Semitism will always exist. Perfectly timed comic pause. As long as I do this show, right? And look, I am part Jewish. I certainly look like it. I have, not a lot. I don't want to exaggerate, but I've had a few anti-Semitic comments, lob my way over the years. People are mad at me. Yeah, I never found it particularly amusing, but I cracked up like that was the funniest thing that I'd ever heard. When he said that, because it was so well pulled off. And you don't want to. I mean, obviously it's ridiculous. There are hacky comedians, who get upset that people don't find their, kind of hacky, trying to be provocative material funny, and that's ridiculous. I mean, getting upset because somebody doesn't think you're funny is like getting upset that somebody doesn't think you're hot. I mean, it's going to do you about as much good, either way. But I think that one of the reasons that I picked that as the title is that since what I'm criticizing is this extreme extreme over focus on individual morality, which is the opposite of what the left is supposed to be about, right? Where, like conservatives are supposed to be about individual morality. We're supposed to be about de-emphasizing individual morality and emphasizing structures and social institutions. So I mean, it's not that the guy who held up the liquor store at gunpoint and killed somebody is a good person and what he did was fine. That's not what we're saying. But we want to emphasize not on moral anger at that guy and punishing him severely. We want to emphasize changing material conditions in a way that's going to lead to there being less crime. In that, for example. And so there's often this disconcerting thing where when leftists start talking about people they consider really problematic, they start sounding like 1990s Republicans, in the suburbs talking about crime. And so one of the reasons I picked the example is not that most of the book is about comedy. It's not. There's the opening chapter is about comedy, and then it moves on to other subjects. But that it seems to me that getting upset, as people do, about the content of comic sets or the politics of comedians, whether some comedian is a good person or a bad, it's bad enough to be obsessed with whether Glenn Greenwald is a good person or a bad person. I mean, at least he's like a politically important journalist. It's pathological to be obsessed with whether a comedian is a good person or a bad person, because they're completely irrelevant, to politics. They're not, unfortunately, sometimes some comedians who like the rest of the book don't like that I said this. You cannot change the world with comedy. It's
of course.
It's just not going to be an effective route for doing that. But which might be an insult to the pride of comedians. But the flip side of that is, since you can't change the world with comedy, being obsessed with whether some comedian is a good person or a bad person is a particularly weird and irrelevant spend of time. So the reason I picked that as the title is that even though it's only one small example of a much larger phenomenon, most of the book is spent on the larger phenomenon rather than that example. It's such an extreme example that I think it really viscerally communicates the idea. And then and then like the other reasons are just that comedians illiterates, and also part of what I was trying to do is that I wrote the book in a feeling of extreme frustration with some of the stuff, and the book and the title. I know it's a fairly flame-throwing title, but it viscerally communicated that frustration.
Let's call it a nice polemic, like it has just like the essence of truth to it. It's like, so you're doing that while this is happening. Okay, maybe get your
exactly. It's a way of kind of grabbing somebody by the collar and saying, "No, seriously, listen to this. This is important," which is has advantages and disadvantages. And I think like to the extent that it gets people to actually read it and then they have to think about it. That's mission accomplished. Of course, to the extent that they like dismiss it based on the title and don't read it, then then that's counterproductive. Overall, I don't know. Time will tell.
Well, I mean, like you said, I feel like there is like this canceling topic in the book, and I think these are also like more or less the first chapters. But then again, I mean, the whole book reads again like the first book too, as an intervention into the leftist discourse. So you are actually aiming at various different strands and various different, let's say, problems. You go from neo-anarchists to tankies, and we'll get to this in a minute. But let's focus on the canceling for 1 second, because here in Germany we also have this, let's say, this phenomenon and this discourse mainly. So we talk about cancel culture. Mainly, the main people that are talking about this here in Germany is the right wing, and or let's say center liberals, maybe more conservative leaning center liberals. So we had cases where there were like some comedians that were rather, well, in my estimation, rather unfunny and making some insensitive jokes. I think against Jews, I think, was this one lady, and then there was another guy, Dieter Nuhr, who basically makes his living as being like Islamophobing, if that is a word, comedy. So, and of course, these people get a lot from the left. They get a lot of, a lot of, how do you say that? Like counter, but also from liberal society, there is some pressure. Change, or go to media and apologize or explain yourselves. But and then when you hear the word cancel culture, it's mostly these right-wing leaning, more conservative leaning people that decry cancel culture because they are being challenged. And interestingly, very few of them ever really get canceled. In fact, if you ask me now, is there anybody that got canceled to the extent that he or she doesn't perform anymore? I couldn't think of a name, right? So now I'm asking. I mean, of course, you're focusing on the U.S. context, but maybe it's similar there too. Is what you are talking about here, is that really a left problem? Are you aiming at that, or is this a broader problem actually that we're seeing?
Sure. So I guess I want to try to disentangle a couple strands of that. I mean, the first thing I'd say is I think the situation in the United States is broadly similar. This is the kind of thing people will say a lot, and not without some justice. I know what they mean when they say it. Look, is anybody ever really canceled? I mean, when's the last time you can think of when, as you say, it happened to the extent that they just don't have a career anymore? And in fact, right, there are plenty of examples of attempted cancellations that springboard someone's career. That's what they that's what brings them to prominence. But I make a few points about this. The first and maybe simplest one is just, and I'm certainly not saying you're doing this, but I think very often when people say this, there's at least a kind of performative contradiction, because on the one hand, oftentimes kind of defenses of canceling take the form of saying, well, what you're calling canceling is just accountability, that it's good
Right.
That these probably people being held to account, people who otherwise wouldn't.
You're being an asshole, and now people are telling you that you're an asshole. That's what's happening, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Right.
when people use the first defense, they're sort of treating canceling as this important like weapon of marginalized people seeking justice. But then they'll also do the second defense, this close to what you just said, which is, well, you know, is this really a big problem? Is anybody really canceled anyway? You know, and
Right.
so, hold on.
Wait,
If the second thing is true, right? If this is a complete ineffective thing to do to people, then how can it be this important tool to help marginalized people achieve justice? It seems like it really can't be both. And what I would say is that the second claim is certainly has a lot more truth to it than the first one. I don't want to. I think it's complicated because sometimes people, you know, it's a little unclear what the threshold is. That certainly, if what you mean is that somebody's left with no friends or supporters, no career, etc., then yes, not, you know, you can find cases, but very rare. I think that's right. Certainly when we're talking about like public figures, not just like nobodies who get fired for a tweet. But on the other hand, people actually do face, you know, like have real, you know, consequences sometimes that are bad. I think it's bad. I think even if, you know, I mean, I think undeserved reputational damage certainly. I think that it's extremely. I think that there is another sort of tension oftentimes within the views of people who think that canceling is fine or maybe even good, where they'll say, well, you know, if it's just that 1,000 strangers are screaming at you on Twitter and you know, calling you a racist and a fascist, no big deal. You can just log off. You know, how is this real damage? And okay, that's one thing if you're going to be consistent about it, but it seems to me that a lot of the same people who say this are people who in other contexts consider purely psychological harms to be extremely important. That if you know, if 1,000 people are saying really racist things to you on Twitter, all of these people would consider that a big problem. They would never say just log off, you know, no big deal. You know, which is why oftentimes you have this weird language game where canceling somebody who they consider a bad person is accountability, or you know, whatever. It's not a big deal, or it's just those people complaining about being criticized. You know, what's wrong with being criticized? That's free speech. But then when somebody they like is being canceled, they've invented this alternate terminology for that. That's targeted harassment. You know, when, you know, when the person they like is being canceled, and it's the same phenomenon, right? You know, cancellation, targeted harassment, whatever. I mean, these are just different terms for the same thing. And I think that like psychological harms are real harms. I don't think that human beings are psychologically built for, you know, 1,000 people, you know, denouncing them at the same time and just sort of shrugging it off as no big deal. I mean, I've kind of gotten to the point where I do, but I don't think that's healthy. And I think that, also, it's, you know, when people say it's just criticism, I often wonder how seriously they mean that, because for one thing, if it was just criticism, where's the accountability? Where's the consequences? You know, when you say, oh, this is good because this is accountability and consequences. Well, being criticized isn't a consequence. Like being criticized is like, oh, I think you're wrong. Here's why, or you know, this is why I think you should rethink this. If you can't tell the difference between a criticism and a hysterical group denunciation, then I really worry about you. Those things do seem very obviously different to me. But that said, I think that the distinction that I would make, and I don't actually think that like cancel culture and whatever, maybe at this point it's become so overused, we need to retire that term and come up with something else, but whatever you want to call it, right? That phenomenon targeted harassment culture, is something that I certainly don't think is unique to the left. I think that, the right is the force in the United States too that spends the most time complaining about it, to be sure, because they've kind of figured out that plays very well for them. Like, there was a review of my book that had a really good line that I've stolen and used many times since, about how there's a reason why the last meeting of CPAC, the big conservative conference that happens every year in the United States, the Conservative Political Action Committee, there's a reason the last CPAC meeting, the official theme was America Uncanceled, and not like America don't raise the minimum wage, right? Like they kind of know that if talking about economics, that's going to go very badly for them because their positions are wildly unpopular. But if they're talking about like cancel culture is bad, then that resonates with a lot of the public. A lot of people, think so too. That they find it viscerally off-putting. And even though I think sometimes people do suffer real harms as a result of it, I don't think that's the main problem with it. Certainly not strategically. Like, there's maybe a moral critique of it that, not maybe, there's definitely a moral critique of it, but that's not what I'm emphasizing in the book, because as you say, it's an intervention. It's an attempt to talk to a very specific group of people. And I don't think that the pure moral argument is going to have that much purchase with the people that I'm trying to talk to, because I think they're kind of prepared for that. They already have their responses ready for that. They'll sort of say, look, yeah, maybe some of this stuff is a little excessive, but it's not that big a deal. Why are you complaining about it? Nobody's really canceled anyway, like you said. Whereas I think if you focus on the strategic argument, then you can get a little bit more to hear it. And I think the strategic argument is, generally speaking, this is not very effective. Like, if the goal is to certainly convince anybody, it's definitely not effective. Nobody's ever said, well, when those 500 strangers on Twitter started denouncing me as a racist and sexist, then I realized that I was wrong, right? Nobody ever says that. But it's certainly not effective for convincing people. It's not even really very effective as a way of making people go away. By and large, as you say, the career might suffer for a while, but they'll be back. And so given that it's not effective in any way, then the question is, what's the point, right? Like, and if it doesn't have the positive effects it's supposed to, but it does have negative effects, then strategically it's a very easy call for me. And I'd say it definitely has negative effects, because even though, and we won't get into this because I know you have other questions, but just to leave this as a marker in case you want to go back to it, this stuff is definitely not confined to the left. It happens all over the political spectrum, no doubt about it, right? But I think there's a particular way that it manifests on the left, given some of their own homegrown pathologies. And I think that the effect of that is such that most people who get a whiff of it want to have nothing to do with it, because why would you sign up for that? And so I think that, so when people say, why are you talking about canceling when here are, look, there are imperialist wars going on, there's police brutality, there's union busting, there are people who die of easily treatable diseases because they don't have health care. In a world like that, why are you concerned with people, with canceling? It's such a non-issue. And I get that, and for a long time that's probably what I would have said. But what I would say now is, because all of those things are so much more important, then why would you perpetuate a culture that makes the left profoundly unappealing to most of the people that we want to win over, precisely so we can do anything about those larger, more important issues?
Here
and
underline that last sentence.
Right, and I Here I also see the common. Maybe let's put this differently, in a question. So if we talk again about what other themes you are covering in your book, so you're talking about DSA conventions. You address Antifa.
Yeah.
You talk about tankies, and you go out You go out on the neo-anarchists in the UK
Yeah.
that also Mark Fisher was talking about, right?
Yeah.
So as good Marxists, if we were to try to exercise abstraction and try to abstract from all these and find the common thing, the common substance of all of these, what would they be? Where do you see that the red thread in all these different issues?
Yeah. So I think that the common thread in all of these issues is what in the book I call the pathologies of powerlessness. And so the way I'm going to explain this is extremely America-centric because it's the context that I know the best. I think that to adapt it to other national contexts, some of it maps on to other contexts and some of it doesn't, and it's complicated. But just to stick with the American case, or certainly the Anglo case in general, right? The U.S., Canada, Great Britain, those countries. I think that broadly speaking, what's happened over the last few decades is that there has been a tremendous retreat of the labor movement at the moment in the United States. I think it might. All right. Certainly, as of a couple of years ago, we had the unionization rate in the private sector was 6.7%. So that is 93.3% of private sector workers in the United States do not belong to labor unions. It's a little bit better in the public sector, but that's also not economy. So there's been this tremendous retreat in labor organization, which is a catastrophe for the left because I think in the United States it'd have to happen a little bit differently due to the peculiarities of our partisan electoral system. But every successful labor or socialist party anywhere in the world pretty much has had an organized working class as its social base. Depending on how you divide up the categories, maybe you can say that like cases where the left takes power because of like a peasant army encircling the cities or something is an exception to that. But I think we could just leave that as what I mean.
Yes.
Every case where there's a successful labor socialist party, it's going to have the organized working class as its base. We just don't have one of those in the United States right now, not to any significant degree.
Right.
And going along with that, this tremendous series of defeats of the labor movement, but it's smaller now than it's been since before, the 1930s. That hand in hand with that, there was everything that happened in the 80s and 90s and O's, which some of the people that I'm talking to in these books, God bless them, are too young to remember what this was like. But let me tell you, as an old man, it was awful. Like being like when I was like a teenage socialist in the 1990s, like it's hard to capture exactly how much worse the political landscape was. And this is after the fall of the Soviet Union, which was enough to convince many people, like most people, that the sort of great clashes between overall visions for how to organize societies that had raged throughout the 20th century were just over. And the model of liberal capitalism just won. That was the overwhelmingly dominant view of like everybody in the 1990s. That like American socialists existed, but they were so marginal that they were like cute. It was like this like interesting oddity. That there were still people, who had these politics. And so basically in that kind of political environment, Margaret Thatcher famously said, there is no alternative, or
right.
Another Thatcher quote that I think really captures what I'm talking about is supposedly she was asked, after she, long after she'd stopped being prime minister, what her greatest political achievement was. And she said New Labour. In other words, that if even the opposition party, the Labour Party, had fundamentally accepted that premises, like that's a big win. And that really showed that she'd remade the political landscape, and the equivalent to an even greater extent happened in the United States, because the closest thing we had to labor was the Democratic Party, which certainly never claimed to be any sort of labor or social democratic party. It was just a regular, liberal party at its best. But it had the same kind of transformation under the Clintons. And so under those circumstances, when anything like even serious social democrats like Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn spent like the overwhelming majority of their political lives as extremely marginal backbenchers, and anything more radical than that was just way off, and in the part of the map marked like here there be dragons, it's just like unthinkable. And so
Right.
if you did have radical left politics under those circumstances, I think, even though of course when you were asked what your political goals were, so it'd say all the things that all of us would say now, right? But I think in practice, under those circumstances, it is extremely difficult not to start to think of politics less as a realistic project to change the material world, and more as a kind of symbolic performance of moral opposition to the way that the world is. Taking a stand, right? It's like you're not really, like the example I always use is like if I love Noam Chomsky, but like if you read like Chomsky books, there's never a point where like on page 193 or something, he'll tell you if a socialist government took power in the United States, here's how it would solve, this foreign policy dilemma, whatever, because the issue just wouldn't even arise. That's just so totally off the radar. That would sound like saying, well, when I'm the emperor of the galaxy, here's what I'll do. It's silly.
Right.
And so under those circumstances, if you're primarily thinking of politics not as a actual effort to win, because you don't think that winning is possible. Like maybe you say you do, but you really don't. Like not deep down. Because all of the evidence of your eyes and ears tells you that it's not possible, then I think you start, what I'm calling the pathologies of powerlessness start to really come up, which is basically that you start doing a lot of things that each goal is to try to win over as many people as possible so you could assemble some kind of majority coalition and take power and achieve your program. If that was your goal, these behaviors would be wildly counterproductive. But if that's not really your goal, if all you're really trying to do is show the purity of your moral stand, then a lot of the stuff starts to make some sense, because you're not really thinking in those terms.
Exactly.
You're thinking about proving how, like really taking the strongest stand possible. So I think that the left version of canceling, and again, there's plenty of canceling across the political spectrum, but the left version of canceling, I think, is one manifestation of that. You're not really worried about how it's going to look to the rest of the world when, like, somebody says, like Natalie Wynn, who's a trans socialist YouTuber, says, like, she tweets out, it makes me a little uncomfortable when left-wing medians start with everybody going around saying their pronouns, because, like, it's kind of ironic. I can go to a sports bar in North Carolina, she writes, and be missed and mammed with no problem all night, referred to as miss or ma'am every time they come to get a drink order. But I go to a lefty meeting and I feel really singled out because it's like her and a bunch of other non-trans people there, and everybody's going around, I'm John, he, him, and it comes around to her, and she can kind of feel everybody turn to stare at her, and she says, that makes me feel kind of uncomfortable. And the response to that is this intense, like hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, having just directing this bile and hatred towards her for months, and trying to get every other person on left-wing YouTube who's been associated with her to denounce her for that. And any remotely normal person, when I say normal, like, I don't mean like, some Norman Rockwell conception of, like, culturally mainstream, white male, whatever, like I don't like gay or trans. I mean, not stoked the political subculture of the left. Any normal person in that sense gets a whiff of that, and whether that normal person is trans or cis, gay or straight, whatever, like most people who are normal in the sense that they spend their lives not worried about stuff like this, but worried about just day-to-day non-political stuff that like 95% of people spend all their time worried about, gets one look at this and says, ugh, right? These people seem extremely unpleasant. Why would I want to have it? Yeah. Actually, but you're not worried about that, right? When people at the DSA meeting say, nobody is allowed to clap, and you have to do like jazz hands, because like clapping is problematic now. Then
can somebody like loop me in? Why is clapping problematic?
Well, clapping is problematic because it's possible that out of the 1,000 people in the room, there are like 3 of them with some sort of medical condition where they're unusually sensitive to noise. Now it seems to me,
but there also might be quadriplegic people who cannot like do jazz hands. So
it's true.
Get the fuck off my back, Jesus Christ!
Yeah, it always struck me that if this was really the point, I'll bet DSA could find in its budget enough money for like 10 pairs of earplugs to pass out. And it's the same thing with the fucking pronouns. If you have like if the concern is that you're going to misgender somebody, that somebody whose preferred pronoun is he is going to be referred to as she or vice versa, right? If that's really the concern, going around and having 25 people in a room go around and say their pronouns at the beginning of the meeting is the least effective possible way of doing that, because nobody remembers anything that anybody says at the beginning.
I'm sorry, I can't even remember their freaking names when there are like 5 or more people in the room. Like, how am I supposed to remember the pronouns?
Remember that. Yeah. If you were really worried about this, right? Here's the solution: just give people name tags, and if they just want to write down their name, they'll write down the name. If there's any other information that they feel is pertinent, including pronouns, they write down the pronoun. And I'm a whole lot more likely to notice what's written on somebody's name tag than I am to remember what they said 45 minutes ago when everybody was going around a circle. Like, I don't remember names, never mind pronouns or, anything else. But the point is, these things aren't really about functionally solving these problems. These things are about showing how deeply you have the right moral commitments. And you're not really worried about how it's going to read to anybody outside of the bubble, because that's just not on your radar. Because you're not thinking about how things are going to read to people outside the bubble, because what you're thinking about, you're not really thinking about how to win all those people over, because you don't really believe that's possible. You're thinking about how can I take the strongest possible stand against the injustices that surround me. And I think it's the same thing when people get obsessed with like tiny political differences within the left, because, hey, I can't change the world, but I can at least change my tiny little corner of the world and get everybody to agree with me. It's the same thing, I think, in the the Tanky case that I think that I think one's more emotional than the ones we're talking about, but like I think that if your goal is to convince people, is to convince like a majority of ordinary working class people whose material interests would align with the left program, that a kind of non-capitalist society is possible that would be desirable, that they'd want to live in, probably the least helpful thing you could possibly do is say, Comrade Stalin did nothing wrong, and when they say that something better than capitalism is possible, what they mean is like Stalin's Russia. That's the thing you could possibly do. But if the point isn't really to convince all of the normies, the point is to take the strongest possible stand against the society that you live in, and just paint the strongest possible contrast. Well, saying, okay, how could socialism work? Well, there's certain industries that we have good beta tested examples that they can be They can be planned outside of the market, and that's shown in the advanced socials and social democracies. And maybe you still need some market mechanisms, but those can, because of the calculation problem, but they can, but those can at least be worker-owned firms funded by public banks, which will roughly be my answer. Not that's like the clearly correct answer. Something there's plenty of room for disagreement about this. Kind of boring. If you say, actually, Eric Honecker's DDR was awesome, that's exciting. That's a much more interesting answer.
It's polarizing. It's polarizing. Yeah, it's exactly.
So it makes you feel like I am really standing against the grain of the society that I'm living in, and look at me. I mean, I think of Mike Brooks would do this thing where he was making fun of a specific person. I'm not going to say their name because people will know who it is, and I don't want to. My purpose is not to to start anything here, but he'd do this thing where he'd be making fun of this person, and he'd sort of do this voice, like he did, and be like, sorry, Dad, I'm a communist. Like sort of thing. That's the real point. That you want to really scandalize everybody at Thanksgiving dinner to really show how radical and different you are, which again doesn't make sense if you have a realistic project to win people over a socialist project. Makes all too much sense if your point is just to take the most daring possible symbolic stand.
Right. Yeah. And the result is creating all these. I mean, what you're actually doing is it's like drawing borders, and you're saying like in group, out group. So we are the ones that think that the Uyghurs in China have had it coming, or they're not actually in camps. They are actually in resorts or something.
It's a test, because if as you say, it's extremely polarizing. And it's at the end of the day, it functions like a loyalty test. That if you are you willing to say the really extreme things that really brand you as identified with this in group, and by alienating the out group even more. Like there's a extremely small and strange Trotskyist group in the United States called the Spartacus League, and they have and at one point they actually had their I mean, maybe they still do, I don't know, I mean if it still exists, but they had one of their officially stated positions was to defend NAMBLA, the North American Man Boy Love Association, which is explicitly a pedophile organization, and to say that these people are being that this is puritanical persecution and homophobic and whatever, that people don't like NAMBLA, and you think, okay, why would they take that stand? What's the point from their perspective? And I think the point, whether conscious or not, is that it really forces everybody who stays after you do that to identify way more deeply with the group, because if you're willing to say things that are going to be quite that shocking to everybody outside the group, right, then that is really emotionally reinforces your connection with the in-group.
Right. I mean pure sectarianism. I mean that's it's about breaking down resistance and filtering out people that are might become trouble in the future. But then in the end somebody always becomes trouble after all. So
it's actually a kind of narcissism instead of kind of political activism. This is one of the most important distinctions. Like especially, I'm now going for the angle with inner left conflicts, for example, because you said the tankies, and I say, well, no, tankies can be righteous assholes. I know, but anarchists can be too. I know for a fact. I worked with a lot of them. No, and I'm just saying, and it's whenever there is not the attitude of hey, how can we move this forward, but how can I show off? And I'm so fed up of these people, and it's mostly guys. I have to be. I'm sorry. like going into this route, but it's mostly guys like just wanking, like like I'm the super anarchist, I'm the super tank. And I'm like, why? Why? Nobody cares.
I mean, that's absolutely right. Like, and I think part of what I'd emphasize too is that there are, I mean, Mark Fisher says in the section of the Vampire Castle essay where he's criticizing the group he's calling neo-anarchists, like, look, there have absolutely been anarchists who actually like made, meaningful contributions to, leading strikes and, and whatever, like dying in the Spanish Civil War and things that are actually important and good. And, maybe there's I mean, not that the dying is good, but the fighting, the fighting the fascists,
the effort, like A for effort.
yeah. It's not just like just through all those people. It's that he's identifying certain attitudes that he saw in the contemporary British left that were just taking it in really silly directions because it has to do with I mean, he doesn't use the phrase, but I mean roughly what we've been calling the pathology of powerlessness. Like he gives the example there of people who have the of this like sort of neo-anarchist attitudes of people who think that like, well, it's okay to like go to a street protest against some program instituted by a previous Labor government being cut, but like if your goal is, but like it's not okay to like actually participate in an effort to elect the Labor Party and go into government and create new programs because that would be reformism. Like that's the sort of thing that's much more about striking this cosmopolitan stance and just having an ideological view anarchism that I certainly have my criticisms of, but that's not the main point. Or similarly in the Tanky case, my point is certainly not that we have to like overcorrect in the other direction and have a and have a sort of cartoonish right-wing anti-communist view of what those societies were like. You can absolutely acknowledge that there are certainly national contexts in which the transition to the system was a very good thing. I have nothing but positive feelings for the Cuban or Vietnamese revolutions. I think I think are heroic efforts to overcome very bad conditions. You can acknowledge that even I mean I sort of playfully brought up the DDR earlier. Like even that. I mean these are complex societies that had there were good things about them as well as bad things about them. You shouldn't default to the sort of grainy black and white film strip imagery if it's nothing but bread lines and gulags. Because that wouldn't be accurate either. Right? These are flawed societies, and we should learn from the flaws and try to do better. But they're not. That doesn't mean that they were like Mordor. So I'm not suggesting that we talk about them as if they were Mordor. But what I am suggesting is that you can acknowledge all that historical complexity and still say, as we try to convince as many ordinary people as possible to sort of come on board with the future socialist project, it's extremely counterproductive not to be very clear on the difference between what we're advocating and it's extremely flawed and ultimately failed experiments that happened before.
Yeah, I like that attitude.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I have a quick question from the chat, maybe. I mean, just to add to this, and then we can wrap this up with a final question from us to you, because we hit that 2-hour mark like 3 minutes ago. But yeah, time flies. So Sebastian, he's a friend of the show. He's asking, is it conspirational to feel like some of these disagreements are manufactured by people who want to break up the left, or are we just really that dysfunctional?
I'm sorry for laughing out loud, but this is painful. Yeah,
I think mostly the second one. I mean, it is kind of funny. I had a discussion about this on my show last summer. I think summer, early fall, with Matt Crispin and Megan Day, and Megan pointed out she was reading into something called COINTELPRO, which was the FBI's program that came
Right.
out in the 70s, the church committee hearings to spy on and disrupt, far left organizations, kind of in the Vietnam era and shortly afterward. And the kinds of things that they would do is, and I mean, it's really kind of remarkable how much effort, was put into this, right? Because oftentimes these are like very small communist organizations they're trying to infiltrate and disrupt. You almost wonder, if they really needed to bother. But they would do things like they would, their infiltrators in one little group would convince that group to make like one issue, like the new issue of their newsletter, entirely about some hysterical denunciation of a second group, and then the FBI would mail copies of the newsletter to everybody in the second group, to make sure that they all saw it, and and that they'd all get mad, at the first one, and like I don't know, I mean, in the age of Twitter, a lot of that's kind of redundant now. We're sort of doing like, do it yourself COINTELPRO, because we're all
Right. We're doing it for them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because you don't need to, like, the FBI doesn't need to, to like, mimeograph and mail out all the copies of some group's newsletter. Like, the tweets are just there for everybody to see. So I think that none of that's to say that I doubt for a moment, really, that there are, like, I'm sure that, like, if you go to like a DSA meeting in Brooklyn where there are 100 people at the meeting or 200 people at the meeting, like, is at least one of them a cop? Yeah, probably, right? Like I don't know, but it would be extremely unsurprising if that turned out to be true. Like, there's a lot of historical antecedents for it. But I guess the big point I make about this is that I think sometimes on the left we really, we really play up our enemies, or the state, or whoever, as if they were all powerful. Like, we talk about some incredibly complicated situation that happened in some country in the global South where there's a revolution and things went wrong and this and that, as if like the CIA, like, by itself had the power to bring about all of that stuff. And the good news is they really don't, right? Like they certainly do many terrible things, right? My point is not to let the CIA off the hook, but they really don't have the power to just unilaterally bring about like massive, social unrest in some country, for example. They might do what they can to contribute to it, but the soil has to be fertile to start with. And I think the same thing goes in the domestic COINTELPRO sorts of situations, that, there are always going to be undercover cops at everything. Always. I mean, that's just going to be a historical constant. But that doesn't mean by itself that you can't win. I mean, in the Bolshevik Party in the years leading up to the Russian Revolution, there were tons of cops at those meetings. The Tsar's secret police, the Okhrana. When they Victor Serge talks about this in his memoir, when they opened up the Okhrana files after the revolution, they found it's like, oh wow, there's like half of the St. Petersburg local and they still there was still a successful revolution in those circumstances. So I would say, like, certainly, I'm not telling anybody to be indifferent or unworried about it, but I think that oftentimes obsession with worrying about, infiltrators actually does the work of the infiltrators. And it's really, I think the question is the left going to conduct itself in a way that makes us extremely vulnerable to this sort of thing or not?
All right. Last question, maybe. Ben, GTAA, give them an argument, and then canceling comedians as while the world burns. Like, imagine those were first parts, the first two parts of a trilogy. What would be the third book that you would be writing about this?
Yeah, that is a really good question, because I have written a third book, but I'm not sure that it's exactly, in that.
Yeah, right.
There's certainly some overlap in some of what's covered, but it's also, I'm also doing something a little bit different with that. And
It's like theories of surplus value. It's not volume 3, right?
yeah, exactly. So I think that what complicates the answer to that question a little bit is, and I alluded to this earlier, is that if I'd written Canceling Comedians a year later than I did, it probably
Right.
would have been a very different book, both because the political moment that I wrote it in had, even though, I think 95% of what's in there is still relevant, but I think the political moment that I was trying to intervene in has really changed in a lot of ways. Like, even by the time it came out, it had really changed in a lot of ways. But also because I think if I were sitting down to write that book now, I probably would have written it with a much broader focus, because it seems to me that there's a sense in which, really, since the summer of 2020, like, the whole country is the vampire castle now. Like, it's not
Right.
it's really changed in some pretty dramatic ways, because it seems to me that that there a lot of the phenomenon that I was kind of talking about, the left's version of in the book, is something that has played out on a much more massive scale in the last year or so. Like, if you think back to that massive wave of unrest following the murder of George Floyd, which really, like, just nothing like that on that scale, certainly in that many places, maybe ever. Certainly to find the closest analogies, you'd have to go back to, like, the Watts riots and 1968, stuff like that. So, and you think about that, and you have like, Minneapolis, actually a police station burned down, which sort of looks like footage from, like, a Arab Spring style revolution somewhere. You have just these gargantuan protests, everywhere, and everybody in the country is focused on this, and nothing happened. Like, at least nothing
Right.
happened on the issues on which all of this was originally supposed to, what it was originally supposed to be about, like that, which was, in the most immediate way, police violence, and in a larger way, a sort of deeply felt widespread sense, which is correct, that there's something very wrong and very unjust about American society. And the label that in the summer of 2020, almost everybody put on that sense that there's something very wrong, very unjust, the word that they put on that was racism, which is a very flexible word, right? It can mean a lot of things. It can, oftentimes what it means is just bad thoughts being in individuals' heads, that individual people, feeling racial prejudice. Sometimes what it means is, this is what activists sometimes call the P+P definition of structural racism, power plus prejudice, which is the idea that people in positions of power will be prejudiced and will act on that prejudice. And, that certainly happens. I don't think it's the main problem, but it's certainly a problem. And then the sort of third thing that people often use it to mean is these big racial disparities in the distribution of poverty. Certainly, that Black people are much more likely than white people in the United States to live in poverty, to live in poor neighborhoods, and everything that goes with that also then disproportionately affects Black people as opposed to white people. So police violence is one of those manifestations that this kind of hyper militarized policing is primarily something that happens in poor neighborhoods, and Black people are more likely than white people to live in poor neighborhoods. They aren't the majority of people who live there, but they're much more likely to live there, and that is reflected in the police killing statistics, which makes I think also racial prejudice by cops is part of what leads to those disparities, but I don't think it's the main part. I think the main part is the distribution of poverty. And oftentimes that's what people are talking about when they talk about racism, are these racial disparity statistics in everything, right? So in poverty and police violence and incarceration and healthcare and education, and income, all these things. And if you mean either of those second things, but especially the third one, nothing has changed since last summer. Not in the least little bit, or if so, maybe a little bit incidentally as a result of stimulus and COVID relief. But that's it, right? And certainly, if you think back to George Floyd, I mean, that's a laid off, unemployed worker who was killed for trying to pass a bad $20 bill to buy a couple of things at the store, and which is certainly emblematic of those larger economic injustices. And because I think the word that people put on this was racism, which makes the goal really unclear, right? So is the goal just to have nobody in positions of power, maybe, have any bad attitudes about race in their heads? Is the goal to fix all these disparities? If the goal is to fix all these disparities, as Adolph Reed and Walter Ben Michaels always point out, does that mean that what we would count as a just society is that the people living in grinding poverty, experiencing police violence, et cetera, were exactly proportionally distributed, that, exactly 10% would be Black, and exactly, let's
still shoot them, but in a good distribution. That's
yeah, exactly. That if we had exactly 10% of police murder victims, were Black, then that would be justice. So
utopia.
But I think because of the confusion about that point, you had all of this energy about this strong felt sense that there was this terrible injustice, which is correct, and it wasn't really clear where it's going to go. And so you had this basically on a much bigger stage. A lot of what I was talking about in the book about the pathologies of powerlessness playing out, because you have, well, what are we going to do about this? It's really unclear. I wrote an article last summer about this called Overdosing on Symbolism. I said, so oftentimes people end up ignoring the big problems because they don't know how to solve them, and sort of going to these weird symbolic battles that doing anything about how policing works in the United States is an incredibly heavy political lift. People don't really know how to do that. But man, if there's one person somewhere who said something problematic, getting him fired, yeah, that's pretty easy, right? Or getting, we can't do anything about these racial disparities and, in 20, different categories, but we can absolutely get, Robin DiAngelo to go to every single Fortune 500 company and yell at people about their internalized white privilege. So we can do that, right? And it's the same kind of pathological moralism and inward going of energy originally focused on more consequential forms of social injustice. So I don't know if I'm the ideal person to write that book, but I mean, I think if I were going to do something that would be completing the trilogy, it would probably be that. If I could also just very quickly address in the chat, Leftwinger81 asks,
sure.
Have you talked about AOC and her present vote? And I would say I think this is actually a really good example, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the social democratic congresswoman from the Bronx, in most ways, her policy preferences, what she votes for, what she votes against, what issues she draws attention to, in most ways is what we want. She's a Bernie person. And so at least relative to what Congress is like, you know, I mean, she's definitely one of the best, like 10 or whatever, members of that 435 person or 535 counting the Senate body. And some criticisms of her are silly, right? We talked about force the vote earlier, but also, as a very flawed politician who I think is a very imperfect vehicle for left politics in many ways that we could get into if that were what the interview were about. She does counterproductive things. She seems to have been one of the main people who was upset that Bernie accepted Joe Rogan's endorsement in the 2020 election, and also.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Was that really her?
Well, there have at least been many reports of that. It's all about sort of stuff going on inside the Bernie campaign, and as far as I know, she's never denied it.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
Right.
It sounds uncomfortably plausible to me, right? That's her position.
All right.
But people got, we just finished a week of everybody losing their minds, yelling at each other about whether the dress that she wore to the Met Gala was good or bad.
Yeah.
Politically. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please do yourself a favor and don't look it up.
And keep not knowing. Keep not knowing. It's okay.
Maintain yourself in a state of not knowing.
Exactly.
But also the other day there was a vote about military funding for Israel. An extra $1 billion for the Iron Dome defense system on top of all the other billions that were already given to this human rights abuser in military funding. And she was initially voting no, and then it seems whatever, God knows, politicians were always pulled around by different kinds of pressure from different groups, and she changed it from no to present. And it's okay, I don't give a shit about what dress she wears. Words cannot express how little I care about that. I think some of the criticisms of her for not doing this one particular parliamentary tactic 6 months ago that I don't think would have worked anyway, I don't really buy that. But that's pretty bad. Go nuts. She deserves all the criticism she gets over this. And I think the way that it ties into the larger discussion is that people are excessively focused, when they're talking about these left politicians, on this kind of overall moral evaluation. That it's I sort of think of it as it's almost like Adolf Reed, one of the times that Michael was interviewing him on TMBS, had this nice line, about how he's he's at least culturally Catholic. He I'm pretty sure Adolf Reed is an atheist, but he sent his son to a rated Catholic school just because it's sort of family tradition or whatever. And so it was really funny coming from him. He was talking about some of what we talked about today with Michael on TMBS, and he said, "Look, ultimately, this is just too Protestant an approach to politics for me. This is it seems to be all about trying to figure out who's going to heaven and who's going to hell." And,
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's how it feels about this. It's so much of the online left, and I'm talking both about the people who love her and the people who hate her, seem to be engaged in this never-ending battle about whether AOC is going to heaven or hell. And I don't care, right? I mean, she's a politician. Politicians,
right?
Politicians.
She should be a tool, basically. I mean, if we had a real healthy workers movement, she would be a tool. If she does some missteps, she gets 1 or 2 missteps, and then there's accountability. She gets cut off, or we cut ourselves off, and that's it.
Exactly. Ideally, there would be a strong enough left that we could exert meaningful pressure. That
right.
Would be oh, if you vote this way, then we're not going to knock on doors for you next time. We might even endorse an opponent, and that'll be a real threat. And that would happen. Of course, we're not strong enough to do anything like that, so we don't exert nearly enough influence on these politicians. But that's exactly the thing. I mean, other than Bernie Sanders is a saint, but other than him, politicians. That was a joke. Politicians are. Politicians are tools. That's exactly right. They're not our friends, right? They're not. It's not we.
I mean, of course they are humans. I mean, and that's also why I don't think you should. Like you should be aware of your parasocial relationship that you have with this person because you don't know this person. Maybe you know this person, but this person doesn't know you.
No,
And on the other hand, it's like this person is now two things for you. It's AOC, the person AOC, but it's also the Congresswoman AOC. And in this function, she's just a tool.
no,
And you should not attach yourself. Yeah.
exactly.
They're not bringing salvation.
Attachment leads to suffering.
No,
Star Wars quotes.
Yeah, be less Protestant and more Buddhist about it.
Exactly.
The only,
Life hacks from Ben Burgess. Be more Buddhist about these kinds of things.
the only people you can have parasocial relationships with are me and Bernie Sanders. Other than that, have just it's like, you don't know these people. They're not your friends. They're also not your, whatever personal enemies. They are either tools of something positive that you can use, or they're impediments to that, in which case, you do that, or as is very often going to be the case, given the largely scattered and powerless nature of the contemporary left, they're going to be a messy combination of the two. And you should give them, you should support them when they're voting the right way, and you should criticize them when they're voting the bad way. And ultimately, you should, desire leads to suffering. You should disengage and try to be more zen about it. Would be my advice. I don't care what dress AOC wears. I don't care whether you or I or anybody else thinks that she's ultimately a good person who's destined for a heavenly reward, or a bad person who should suffer. All I care about is how she votes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you,
Ben. Such a long time. It's like 2.5 hours now. I think we wrap this up now. I mean, I could keep going, but yeah, let's give you a day back.
I have to say this is definitely a high point for me, because if you asked me like 12 months ago whether I would be interviewing someone like you, like one of our role models, this has been absolute honor, and I am humbled by your appearance, and I love talking to you. And I would actually just point out, let's not let this end here. Maybe let's keep this conversation going some other time. I think we have so much to share with each other.
Oh, there are a lot of topics that I wanted to go into. Like, I think the tankies thing we can do a whole episode on, because we got some tankies in our chat. So let's talk about that.
And we do love them, like we love unruly children, but we also need to educate them a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Ben, thanks so much. Seriously, let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
And let's, Then we say good night. Also, good night to all the over 100 viewers. I think at some point, to all the viewers of Ben Burgess's channel, who I have here on my left. Thanks a lot. We couldn't go so much into your chat questions because we don't see them in our tool. So sorry for that. We'll try to make that work next time. So everybody, have a nice day, have a nice night. See you soon.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Und zwar als allererstes, folgt uns bitte überall, wo...
All right. There you go. That was the 99 zu 1 live stream. I know that there were like 3 times as many people watching that when it was aired the first time. But since, as discussed at the beginning of this live stream, if you missed that part, that was the one video that we did not get back when YouTube restored everything else. So I thought I should put it back here for all the people who told me that they were like halfway through watching it when all those YouTube videos disappeared. So, the good thing about this, Adored Pariah says, I'll have to rewatch Got Here Too Late. The good thing is that YouTube is forever, or at least that's what I thought before whatever happened on Sunday happened. But, short of that sort of thing, YouTube is forever. You can go back and, whenever, right? We don't really know what happened. There's been some effort to figure that out, but it doesn't, I don't want to repeat myself too much from the beginning of the stream, but it doesn't seem like YouTube did this intentionally. Somebody somewhere messed up, and videos were saying that we took them down, which we absolutely did not. So I don't know what happened, but all's moderately well that ends moderately well. And other than this video that we just replayed, everything else, everything else is still, is back up and running again as of like an hour or two ago when they restored it all. So I, feel good about that. It's a little frustrating because, like I said, I know so many people, people were cut off in the middle of watching the 99 Sue Eins stream. And there are various other things that were just starting to pick up views, like we've done the stream with Kenzo Shibata on Sunday night, where we watched Charlie Kirk and JD Vance talking about right-wing populism, and Kenzo and I had some fun with the contradictions of that idea. That was, again, just started to, to like really sort of pick up steam in terms of views when it disappeared, but now it's back, and what views it had are back. So it's frustrating, but it seems to be a passing episode, whatever strange glitchy thing happened there. In any case, this is always the thing. YouTube is until YouTube decides that. This is always frustrating because if you're doing this, what I do, what my friends at Left Reckoning and This Is Revolution do, etc. Even what's done on a much larger scale by Majority Report or whatever that. Like, we're all tenant farmers and farming little plots of land within the fields that are ultimately owned by YouTube, and they get to decide what goes down. And sometimes their rulings are whimsical and hard to decode, even when they do something intentionally, like when they took down that Natalie Wynn thumbnail for violating their sex and nudity policy, even though she was fully clothed. And not in a particularly provocative posture or anything, just sitting there, or when they took down the January 6th stream, that we did on January 6th as all of that was happening, and said that we were violating the policy against spreading disinformation about the 2020 election, which obviously nobody on there was doing. I mean, I don't agree that Trumpist conspiracy theories should be censored. I'm a big free speech guy. I think that Trumpist conspiracy theories should be debunked and made fun of, but I don't think they should be censored. But even if we do accept that they should be censored, that doesn't, nobody was doing that. So oftentimes the algorithm makes bizarre decisions, or even whatever human is reviewing what the algorithm does makes bizarre decisions. And then sometimes you get things that don't even seem to be decisions. They just seem to be like something misfired somewhere in a weird way. Like we tried to delete one video, or not even, which was from when we were first trying to do the 99 Sue Eins stream, and there was this one that didn't end up getting used, and somehow the YouTube, algorithm, it's like, oh, you want to delete this video? You must want to delete 28 videos, which, trust me, we really, really, really did not. But seems to be resolved for now. Fingers crossed, nothing like this is going to happen again. Meanwhile, I really hope that everybody who's watching this has seen the episode that we did last night, season 3, episode 4, Vivek Chibber versus the Forces of Reaction. I think that was honestly a just like sizzling hot conversation, like Vivek's analysis of subjects ranging from why conservatism is morally bankrupt to how exactly we should understand the materialist theory of history, to why the left fails, to what the normative basis is for socialist politics philosophically. Like, all of that stuff was, liberalism and socialism, all of that stuff was so good. I was so happy with that conversation. So I hope I agree. Black Spine made fun of is the most important thing. I mean, whatever. If you're somebody that you could really think that you could convince, then, gently explain it to them, but otherwise just have some fun with it. But in any case, the Vivek Chibber conversation was really good. I think that guy is one of the most interesting Marxist thinkers, both in the sort of orthodox Marxist parts of what he thinks and the revisionary. Let's think hard about these arguments, and maybe we do have to, take out some of this and rethink parts of it aspects. But, in both of those aspects, I think that Vivek is one of the most valuable Marxist thinkers alive today. So I was thrilled to get to talk to him, and I really enjoyed that conversation. So I hope you check that out. Black Spine says it would be really cool if they replaced the algorithms with actual people, but then they would have to pay them. And Google doesn't want to spend all that money on hiring all those extra employees. In any case, please do check out the Vivek Chibber conversation from last night. Please do check out the breakdown of the Charlie Kirk, J.D. Vance conversation I did with Kenzo on Saturday night. Please check out the new, now that that's been restored, now that the conversation with Kenzo has been restored, and now that the Thursday night debate breakdown has been restored from last Thursday, where Brent Lengel and I spent 5 hours going through the entirety of Vosh's debate with Charlie Kirk. The reason, of course, that I'm doing all of these is that I am debating Kirk this weekend as a guest on, I guess he has a new show, Debate Night with Charlie Kirk, and the debate with me is going to be part of that. But I am flying to Arizona on Thursday to do that. And so, of course, I've been doing my homework and watching all of the old debates that he did with lefties. So, we did debate breakdowns of the Vosh and Hassan Piker ones. And I watched and we did some clips in an episode a few weeks ago, like that, the very last episode of season 2. We went through some clips of the one that he did with Kyle Kalinske. And even though we haven't done anything with it in the channel, I also watched the one with Sam Cedar. And for my money, for whatever it's worth, I think out of the ones that have happened so far, Sam Cedar was number 2, but I think the best one was Kyle Kalinske. I think Kyle really had Kirk's number. So that was good. What I want to do for this debate is something a little bit more specific and focused, which is to sort of try to really take on the pretense that right-wing economic populism is a thing that exists, because I just don't think it is. So in any case, that's right. He said that in the debate with Hassan, that he lives like a capitalist every day. I don't know what that means, that, he goes around with a top hat, and he swims around in a pool of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck every day, or, he has, he lives like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons every day. But yes, he says he lives like a capitalist every day. So fun stuff. That's an interesting thought. Darius Haddad asked if I wanted to reach out to, he means one of Marx's great, I think it'd be more than great, right? I think it'd be like a few great grandkids for an interview. I was not aware that Marx had living descendants. I'd be fascinated to hear if they're Marxists, if they're people who give interviews, what it was like growing up in that family, if that's right. But in any case, that is definitely an interesting thought. Awaken says, Awaken, says Kirk thinks a capitalist is able to cheerleads for capitalism. Yeah, I guess. Although in that case, what does it mean to live like a capitalist? That's confusing. But in any case, speaking of Charlie Kirk, I need to go back to doing debate prep, which is what I was doing before I realized that these have been restored and thought it'd be a good idea to do this stream. But in any case, thank you guys for watching. I know for some of you, this is probably your second round of watching this. So anybody who's in that category, like, I really appreciate it. But in any case, I think we're going to cut off there for now. There's no Thursday night debate breakdown because I'm going to be in a plane at that time on my way to Arizona. But I'll be getting back Sunday night, but we will have the regular episode as always on Monday. Monday's episode is going to be my conversation with one of my very favorite season 2 guests, back for season 3, Lilian Sekerchia. And we are going to be back talking about the Marxist theory of history, because it is very much on my mind, because I'm getting ready to teach that class, the G.A. Cohen class at the School for Social and Cultural Change. That's Analytic Marxism and the Materialist Theory of History. So the textbook is going to be, I think I actually decided just the first half of G.A. Cohen's book, Karl Marx's Theory of History. First half, because I want to make sure we really have time to work through all the arguments in that over the course of the 8 weeks of the class. The first class session, they're all going to be on early Sunday afternoons to accommodate as many time zones as possible. So early Sunday afternoons EST, so late morning PST, early evening Europe. If you're in South Korea, unfortunately, there's probably no way to make that work. But but if there are a bunch of people in South Korea who want to take a class from me, let me know, and we'll try to work something else out. But in any case, so the materialist theory of history is on my mind because I'm getting ready to teach that class in October and November. Mandatory plug, if you want to take it. The URL for the School for Social and Cultural Change is SSCC. So it's sscc.teachable.com. And you can also see all the other classes that they're offering in October and November. So that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about with Lilian Sekerchia on Monday. But also I have been really enjoying going back to the sort of, zero books / TMBS roots and doing more debunking lately. So also look forward to more of that. I'm sure there'll be some of that on Monday. And of course, we'll talk probably in the main episode, but worst case scenario, the post game for patrons, we'll talk about how the debate with Kirk went, since it probably won't have been broadcast yet, but it will have happened by then. So all that is coming up on Monday. We have clips until then. Meanwhile, I will see you all on Monday. Thank you again so much for watching this sort of strange stream that we did tonight. Left is best.